Well, we talked about this writer's strike in Hollywood and what it means. I know a lot of us right now looking, hey, there's so many options. We'll catch up with this story when we can, but it's actually a pretty big deal. And I reached out to our film study professor who also hosts our film school on Fridays, Joe Fortunato's right in the middle of this story, to give us some insight on how big of a thing this really is, this writer's strike in Hollywood. And Joe, thanks for joining us this morning on the show. So talk about this strike, what you know, and really how big this is.
Well, good morning, Ray. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, this is a pretty big deal. And I know the average person may not think so, or it's not on their radar. But certainly for the writers, obviously, and Hollywood, and pretty much everybody who makes entertainment product, film and television, because what happens here with this strike is going to trickle down, as we say, to all the below-the-line people, the directors, the actors and stuff, all of whom routinely renegotiate their deals with the producers. And just a full disclosure, I am a member of the WGA. This is my union, even though I don't currently make my living as a writer. I've been a member for over 20 years, and so full disclosure there. So I did vote to strike. About 97% of the guild voted to strike, and what's going on here is it's the end of our MBA, our minimum basic agreement, and every few years that needs to be renewed. And what happens when the Writers Guild, or pretty much almost any guild, goes on strike, it's usually because of distribution changes. And that's what's happening now. Is we're living now in a world of streaming, which really didn't exist, at least not to the degree it does now, the last time the writers went on strike in 2007. That was more about residuals for digital content and stuff. And this happened in the 80s with video, home video and cassettes and DVDs. It happened back in the 70s when cable came on the scene. So when the distribution changes, that changes the landscape of how people are paid. And that's what's happening now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. It comes down to dollars and cents, but it's a lot more than that because there's more options to get these type of films and TV shows with so many different outlets, right, Joe? And that adds up to more dollars for the writers.
Well, you would think so, but it actually doesn't currently, and that's what they're fighting for. Because in the old days, and I'm using air quotes because it's not that old, but you would have network TV, and they would have 22 usually episodes a year, and it would be pretty steady employment for writers who were on those shows. That's not the case anymore. Not all of, but so much television has migrated to Netflix and Hulu and HBO and Amazon and all these other places, and they only usually do about 8 or 10 episodes. So it's a lot less episodes. So the writing is not steady employment. It's what the writers are fearing. It's becoming what they call a gig economy. They're just going in, doing something, and leaving instead of having sort of an ongoing payment like they used to do in the old network days. So that's actually cutting the salaries fairly significantly of the writers, and they're having what they call mini rooms now, the studios. Instead of a writer's room, a usual writer's room, which might be 8, 10, 12 writers working for a full season, they'll hire just a handful of writers to sort of get the season started or to break the stories for the season and then decide if they're even going to make a season. So instead of full employment for all of those writers, you have just a few weeks of employment for a smaller set of writers. So there's, just because we have more TV now with streaming doesn't mean that the writers are benefiting from that. And that's actually, in a nutshell, what this strike is about.
Almost sounds like session players to me, Joe, in the world
Very
of
much.
In the world of music.
Analogy.
Yeah. It almost sounds like they're going from room to room and it's not steady, and there's a lot of question marks on when their next gig is going to be. That's well said there, Joe. Thank you. Joe Fortunato is with us, film study professor and host of our film school Fridays on WAKR. Joe, let me ask you this. How far in advance, paint the picture for me for a timeline. Let's say I am the fan of show A, and this strike is currently the strike is ongoing right now. Do they have next season written and going already? or are they still in the middle of the next season? How does that work as far as a timeline for fans of particular shows or movies?
Well, this is, again, how the landscape today is very different from the old days. And quite frankly, this current landscape is to the benefit of the producers and the studios rather than the writers. So this could lead to a longer strike than in the past. And the reason for that is so much of the streaming content is already in the can, as they say. They do these smaller 8-10 episodes, and they do them all at once, and they're all done before they're even released. So when in the old days, again, with network television, writers would be working throughout the season, and they might finish a show 3 or 4 weeks before it airs. So a stoppage of work would essentially cut off that pipeline, in a month or two. Whereas now, if these shows, like Succession is already done, Ted Lasso's already done, Mrs. Maisel's already done, so it's not going to interrupt these shows, which means that the viewer isn't really going to feel this for months and months ahead, which makes it, a little bit harder for the writers to gain some traction. Now, that's the difference of that is the late night shows, and fans of late night shows or live shows like the MTV Awards, those are already dark. They got canceled or went off the air immediately because, they're doing shows on a daily basis or it's a live show. So those shows are being affected. Reality shows are not covered under the Writers Guild agreement, so that won't necessarily be affected. So this summer, if you're a fan of Big Brother or something, those shows are going to continue. So this is actually a little tougher for the writers because it's not going to affect the regular viewers and hence the studios right away.
And Joe, to wrap this whole thing up, you mentioned that you voted to strike and such. Are you optimistic that something can get done relatively in a short period of time here, or do you envision this being drawn out for quite some time? Where are we in negotiations and the talk with this writer's strike?
Sadly, I'm not real as optimistic that this is going to be short. I think this might be long, partly for the reason I just said, that the hurt, as it were, for the studios and the networks and isn't going to be felt for a while. So they have a longer time to hold out. Secondly, and this again goes back to the traditional season, this is sort of an odd time for this strike to start because for the very few shows, the network shows and stuff that are affected, they're already kind of wrapped up for the season, and they usually go on hiatus during the summer and don't really start up until, late summer or early fall. So, going on strike now isn't going to affect anything right away. And then the other thing is just that, at the negotiation table right now, and again, I might be a little biased because as a member of the Guild, but the producers and studios have either rejected or not even counteroffered so many of the wishes of the Guild. And if you're not even coming halfway, it's kind of hard to make a negotiation.
Well, there's a lot of jobs, a lot of dollars, a lot of entertainment on the line here with this writer's strike. And as Joe mentioned it is a really big deal when you look at the outlets. You might not feel it right away, as Joe mentioned, because a lot of this stuff, as he said, quote, in the can. But if this continues, that means the following seasons and those type of things that you're anxiously waiting for could certainly be delayed.
I have heard from some people, writers are well paid and, these are rich people and stuff, and that's just generally not the case. Well, just like any profession or certainly any profession in the entertainment industry, there are a handful of people at the top who are very well compensated, maybe even rich by our standards. But the vast majority of people are, middle-class people who are working on a show and get paid, a decent salary, but it's still, not as lucrative as some people might think. And then, of course, there's a lot of people that aren't writing at all. So, so much like many labor strikes, this is not just for now, but it's for the future generations to keep it so that writers can make a living. And if this stoppage continues, it's going to affect other people, not just writers, like I said, and not just directors and crew members and stuff, but people like caterers and things like that that support the entertainment industry. So it's going to affect a lot of people.